I'm Richard Hefner, your host on The Open Mind, and what I hope we can talk about today, talk about in clearly measured terms, is certain American intellectuals' sense that the middle must be found again in our national life between extremes that for too long now have threatened the very fabric of a potentially good society.
There seems to be a growing feeling in America that we have been spending too much time worrying about what the individual can take from society and too little time on what we should give back.
We're visiting with Professor Amitai Etzioni, who is a communitarian. He's also a professor at George Washington University, where he teaches political science.
Amitai Etzioni has always lived in the world of ideas, mostly in the ivory tower of academia, and for the last 13 years at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Many of the ideas of the 64-year-old sociologist have found their way into numerous articles and books. But Professor Etzioni's latest and perhaps most ambitious work is aimed at creating a movement. It is called the Spirit of Community. Its aim to create a new moral, social, and public order based on restored communities.
Communitarian movement, and define it in 25 words or less, if you can.
I'll try. It's a group of people who came together from all over the country to shore up the moral, social, and political foundation of the society. Families, schools, neighborhoods, to do it ourselves. I live in Washington. A lot of people say, what will Clinton do for us? But we all have to participate. We can't just lay it on the president.
We have gone too far in our concern for individual rights unmatched with individual responsibilities. We have too many people who want to take and not give. We have too much of a good thing, too much individualism. And what we need now is balance that, this concern for neighborhoods, for family, above all for the moral order.
When a child is born, they have no values. They have no moral commitments. Somebody has to take each new generation and introduce them to the values of the community. Now, later they may rebel and change them, but first somebody has to introduce them to them. Well, about half our families, by my calculations, that no longer happens because they are too busy making a living, and not out of their fault, economic pressures and such, they're not there. Either not there physically or not there psychologically. Then these kids come to school, there's already a problem. The schools say, we cannot engage in character education. We are overwhelmed as it is, just keeping a law and order, just teaching English. Now they graduate, and half of them never had the kind of personality formed which you need to be a civil and productive member of society.
We tend to think about the nation as a lot of individuals, but in effect there are important communities, ethnic communities, racial communities, and in the past there was an idea that they should all melt away their heritages and all become unhyphened Americans. We don't think that's necessary. I think it's perfectly right for Irish, Polish, whatever Americans to keep their dances, their cuisines. In fact, it enriches the country, as long as they accept that there's a certain bond we all share. And that's our slogan is pluralism within unity. Now, what are these values we all need to agree on? Is first of all the democratic form of government, the Bill of Rights, and mutual tolerance. Don't ask what your country or your society or your community should do for you. Ask what you can do for the future we all share. When we ask young Americans if they would insist on their right as due them to be tried before a jury of their peers if they caught committed a crime, they all say, of course, that's one of my rights. When we ask them what to serve on a jury, they say, not me, I'm busy, I get some unemployed, some retired citizen. Well, the illogic of it, you cannot have a jury of your peers if your peers won't serve. You cannot take and not give in a community. Now, it's a small finding. In a much larger way, we do studies of what Americans feel about the government. And we find a lot of Americans feel the government is too big, it should be cut, there should be less taxes, less regulations. Then we ask them about government services, and they all say, oh, we need more health care, we need more child care, we need more housing, we need more education. And you put them next to each other and you see the illogic of it, aside from the indecency of it, that you want to take and you don't want to give. Who's going to pay for it? There is in the end no Uncle Sam with a deep pocket who can take care of it all. Or one last example. Many Americans, not all, but the overwhelming majority of Americans, were very, very proud what we did in the Gulf. They don't want to serve in the armed forces. They don't want the children to serve. They don't want anyone to pay for it. But if you want to have defense, if you want to have government services, if you want to have a moral community, somebody has to give and not just take.
How can people get a copy of the Responsive Community?
Well, the easiest way, if they'll drop me a line, a postcard at George Washington University, Washington, D.C., 20052. They don't have to have a building or a street if they just write my name or the Responsive Community, George Washington. We're trying to find people all across the country who will set up local groups, who will support communitarian values in both political parties and across the country. By the end of the 90s, we have recommitted ourselves to a social fiber.
Well, let's hope you're right, Professor Amitai Etzioni. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.